Hello, everyone. This is Notes for 11C. Notes for 11C. So if you think about what we've been doing lately, we have been working on problems that involve exponents. Well, now we're going to start working on lessons involving roots. And roots and exponents are related. So the first thing that we're going to do, again, remember this is Notes for 11C. So if you look at number 1, it says that it wants you to match the root with its value. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to do the square roots. So if you look at each of the roots, I want you to notice that on this first one, there's a little 3 in the corner. That's a cube root, okay, with a little 3 in the corner. Now look at this one and notice there's nothing in the corner. Well, there is, it's just invisible. There's a little 2 in the corner, but it's invisible. And we're going to talk about the ones that have an invisible 2 first. So this one, it's got the invisible 2. And this one, it's got the invisible 2. And this one has the invisible 2. And then, of course, this one that I started with. So notice that we're eliminating the ones. We're not going to do the ones yet that have the 3. We're only going to do the ones that don't have a number, and we know that that number is a 2. So when you're talking about a square root, which is the ones that have no number, okay, that's talking about something to the second power, okay? So I want you to think about if we write out things to the second power. So 1 to the second power. Okay, that equals 1 times 1, which is 1, okay? And then 2 to the second power, that equals 2 times 2, which is 4. And then 3 to the second power equals 3 times 3, which is 9. And then 4 to the second power equals 4 times 4, which is 16. And then 5 to the second power equals 5 times 5, which is 25. And then 6 to the second power equals 6 times 6, which is 36. And then 7 to the second power equals 7 times 7, which is 49. And then 8 to the second power equals 8 times 8, which is 64. Okay, the very first thing that I want you to do is I want you, and you got to write small, because there was a whole lot of those, right? So you got to write small. I want you to write all of those in your work area, just like I did. So pause the video and write those down. Okay, now that you've written them down, now what we're going to do is we're going to start going through the problems. Now remember that we're only looking at the ones that don't have anything in the corner, because remember we said there's an invisible 2 in the corner. So this first one here is the square root of 64. So I'm going to draw a little line right here, and I'm going to look at all of these numbers, and I'm going to find the one that's 64. And does everyone notice that that's the one that's 64? So right next to it, I'm going to write the square root of 64 equals. Okay, now, what did we learn right here? Isn't 8 squared equal to 64? Because 8 times 8 is 64. So the square root of 64 equals 8. Okay, but there's more. Ladies and gentlemen, there's actually 2 answers if we do the square root of 64. Because the square root of 64 is 8 or negative 8. I want you to think about this. 8 times 8 is 64. Negative 8 times negative 8 is also 64. A negative times a negative is a positive. Now, if we look at all of our letters, the one that matches is letter F. So letter F is this one right here, letter F. Okay, now we're going to look at the next one down, which is the square root of 16. So we're going to look at our list right here, and we're going to find 16. And it's right there. So the square root of 16 equals 4 And then you know it also equals negative 4 for the same reason that square root of 64 was 8 and negative 8. Because 4 times 4 is 16 and negative 4 times negative 4 is 16. So if we look at our options over here, notice the one that's 4 is D. So this one is D. Okay, now we're going to go to the next one down, the square root of 49. And we're going to look at all of our numbers, and we're going to find 49, and it's right there. So the square root of 49 equals 7 and negative 7. Because 7 times 7 is 49. That's how I got that. So now we're going to look, and do you notice that letter A is 7? So this one is letter A. Okay, now we're going to skip the next one because it's a cube root, and we're going to go to the last one. And the last one is the square root of 36. And so we're going to look all of them, and we're going to find 36. And that's this one. Well, the square root of 36 equals, look at that, 6. Because 6 times 6 is 36. So 6 is C. So this one is C. Okay, now I'm going to stop for just a moment. Sorry, I didn't realize my computer went black. I'm going to stop for just a moment, and I'm going to talk about, so what does a square root mean? Okay? If you see a square root, it's saying what number times itself equals that. So what number squared equals that? So that's why we wrote out the perfect squares. Okay, now we're going to skip to the 2 that we have left over, and these are the perfect cubes. Notice that these 2 have a 3 in the corner. So now I'm going to make a little line, and we're going to do 1 to the 3rd power, and that equals 1 times 1 times 1. 1 times 1 is 1 times 1 is 1. And then we're going to do 2 to the 3rd power, which is 2 times 2 times 2. Okay, 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8. Okay, now what I want you to do is I want you to write that down in your work area. So you should have all of the red that I've got written down. All of that should already be in your work area. Now you're going to write 1 to the 3rd equals 1 times 1 times 1 equals 1. And then 2 to the 3rd equals 2 times 2 times 2, which equals 8. Okay, now the first one is the cube root of 8. So the cube root of 8, we know, we look over here and we find 8. So what to the 3rd power equals 8? It's 2. So the answer is 2. 2 to the 3rd power equals 8. And 2 is E. So this first one is E. And then the last one is the cube root of 1. So we're going to go over to our list and we're going to find 1. And notice that's the first one right there. What number to the 3rd power equals 1? 1. So our answer is 1, which is G. Okay, now before we move on to the next problem, I need to explain something because I want you to notice that when I did the cubed, the 1 cubed and the 2 cubed, so we got 1 and we got 8, notice we only have one answer. But when we did the squares in the red, do you notice we had 2 answers? So in the red, all of those had 2 answers. 4 and negative 4, 6 and negative 6, 7 and negative 7. But when we did these, they only had one answer. There's a really good reason for that. The negatives don't work if you try to do them with the cubes. Because if I do negative 1 times negative 1 times negative 1, okay, negative 1 times negative 1 is positive 1. And then positive 1 times negative 1 is negative 1. Uh-oh. So I wanted the cube root of 1. For the last one that we just did over here, I wanted the cube root of 1. Well, if I do negative 1 times negative 1 times negative 1, I end up with negative 1, not positive 1. So if you're doing a cube root, it only has one answer. But if you're doing a square root, it has 2 answers because a negative times a negative is a positive. So a square root, a number squared, can be either positive or negative. And when you square it, when you times it by itself, it will be positive every time. Okay, now make sure you have all the work in the work area and then submit. And we go on to number 2. Oh, my mouse isn't working. Hold on. There, now it's working. Okay, number 2. So number 2, we have our squareds again, and we have a couple of cubes again. So we're going to do the same thing that we did last time. So we're going to do 1 squared equals 1 times 1 equals 1. And then we're going to do 2 squared equals 2 times 2 equals 4. And then 3 squared equals 3 times 3, which equals 9. And then 4 squared equals 4 times 4, which equals 16. And then 5 squared equals 5 times 5, which is 25. And then 6 squared equals 6 times 6, which equals 36. And then 7 squared equals 7 times 7, equals 49. And then 8 squared equals 8 times 8, equals 64. Okay, now I'm not done. We need a couple more. So we're going to come over here and we're going to do 9. 9 squared equals 9 times 9 equals 81. And then 10 squared equals 10 times 10 equals 100. Okay, now we're going to do exactly what we did before. We're going to do all the squareds first. So the first one is x squared equals 64. So remember, when we're doing this, we look at all of the answers that we did. That's where we look and we try to find 64. And notice the 64 is right here. What number squared equals 64? That's 8. Now remember, there's 2 answers, 8 and negative 8. So E is our answer to the first one. Okay, now the second one is a cubed. We're going to do that one later. Third one is a cubed. We're going to do that one later. So we're all doing all the squareds first. So now we're going to look at all of our squareds and we're looking for 100. Okay? Well, that's right here. So I found 100. What number to the second power equals 100? 10. Now remember, a negative times a negative is a positive. So the answer is 10 or negative 10. So that's letter D. Okay, now we're doing this one. So x cubed equals 60. Oh, nope, we're not doing cubes. X squared equals 81. So we're looking for 81. So we look at all of our answers and we find 81, and it's right here. What number to the second power equals 81? Well, it's 9. So 9 and negative 9. Remember, negative 9 squared is negative 9 times negative 9, which is positive 81. So letter E is the right answer for that one. And then this one, x squared equals 49. So we look at all of our answers and we find 49. So 49 is right here, and that's 7 squared. So my answer is 7 or negative 7, which is G. Okay, now I'm ready to do the cubes. Okay, so now I'm going to put a little box around the squareds, and I'm going to start the cubes. So 1 to the third power equals 1 times 1 times 1, which equals 1. 2 to the third power equals 2 times 2 times 2. Okay, 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8. 3 to the third power is 3 times 3 times 3. 3 times 3 is 9. 9 times 3 is 27. 4 to the third power is 4 times 4 times 4. 4 times 4 is 16. 16 times 4 is 64. Now, did you notice that I went over off to the right and I did the multiplying? That's because for this lesson, a calculator is not allowed on the SBAC. So I have to show my multiplying. And then 5 to the third power is 5 times 5 times 5. 5 times 5 is 25. 25 times 5 is 125. And that's as high as I need to go. So now, make sure you get all the work in the work area. Everybody, and remember, you got to write small because there's so much work. So the first one is x cubed equals 1. So we go to our cubes. Now we're in the red, not the purple, and we're looking for 1. And notice that's the first one. What number to the third power equals 1? Well, it's 1. So notice that that is the answer that's just a 1. Now remember what we said back in the first problem. When you cube it, 1 times 1 times 1, there's only one answer. Okay? So the only answer is 1, so it's C. Remember that you can't have a negative, because if you do a negative times a negative times a negative, you get a negative. And I needed it to be positive 1. Next one is x cubed equals 125. So I go look at my answers and I find 125, and that's this one. And if you look, that's 5 to the third power. So the answer is 5. And 5 is F. And then our last one is x cubed equals 64. So I come down here and I look at all of my answers and I find 64. And 64 is right here. What number to the third power equals 64? It's 4. So my answer is 4, which is H. So when you have x squared equals 64, I want to know what number squared equals 64. Okay? What number squared equals 64? What number times itself equals 64? If I have x cubed equals 64, I want to know what number times itself 3 times. What number to the third power equals 64? And that is 4. 4 times 4 times 4 is 64. 8 times 8 is 64. So you have to pay attention to the exponent. Now, one more quick thing. When you see x squared equals 64, there's actually something that you're doing on both sides. You're doing the square root of 64. And the square root of 64 is what number squared equals 64. That's what you're doing. Okay? Now you're going to submit. Okay, now hold on a second. I wrote the wrong thing for x squared equals 81. For x squared equals 81, I wrote the wrong thing. I meant to write an A, right? Because 9 times 9 is 81. And I'm not sure how that ended up looking like an E and not an A. A is 81. Okay, so E, C, F, D, H, A, G. And then submit. Okay, number 3. So number 3 is what number squared equals 64? Then what number cubed equals 64, and so on. Okay. So once again, I'm going to write out my squareds. Well, actually, maybe I'm not going to do that. So I'm going to write number 1, x squared equals 64. And then we have to square root both sides to undo the squared. If you do a square root and a squared, you undo it. So you end up with x equals. Okay, now let's think back because we just did this twice. What number times itself equals 64? Okay, 1, no. 2, no. 3 times 3 is 9. 4 times 4 is 16. 5 times 5 is 25. 6 times 6. See what I'm doing? Instead of writing it down, I'm thinking it through. 6 times 6 is 36. 7 times 7 is 49. 8 times 8, 8 times 8. 8 times 8 is 64. Now, remember that if we're doing a square root, there are two answers. It could be 8 or negative 8. So you're going to type 8 comma negative 8. Okay, now the next one is a cube, okay? So let's do that in a minute. Let's do the squareds first. So let's go to number 3. X squared equals 11. So everybody's going to write x squared equals 11. And then remember, we have to square root both sides. So we square root, we square root. Okay, now we have a problem because when I did all of the squareds, I don't remember seeing 11. So 1 times 1, or wait a minute, let me do that again. So 1 squared was 1 times 1 was 1. 2 squared was 2 times 2, which is 4. 3 squared was 3 times 3, which is 9. And then 4 squared was 4 times 4, which is 16. Okay, wait a minute. I never hit 11, right? I got 1, 4, 9, 16. Nowhere in there did I hit 11. So this is the first time in this whole lesson that we've been doing where it doesn't come out an even number. So when it doesn't come out an even number, we type the square root. It's kind of weird. So it's the square root of 11, comma, negative the square root of 11. Remember, when you have a square root, there are two answers, a positive and a negative, because a negative times a negative equals a positive. Okay, now we've got the cubes. So the first one is x cubed equals 64. So in my work area, I'm going to write x cubed equals 64. Well, if to undo a square, we do a square root, to undo a cubed, we do a cube root. So we do the root with the 3 in the corner. Okay. Now, again, if you do a cube root and a cubed, they cancel each other out. So all you have left is x. Okay, now I need the cube root of 64. Okay, now I got to write this down because we don't remember everything. So 1 to the third was 1, equals 1 times 1 times 1, which is 1. 2 to the third was 2 times 2 times 2. Okay, 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8. Then 3 to the third is 3 times 3 times 3. 3 times 3 is 9, times 3 is 27. And then we do 4 to the third. 4 times 4 times 4. Okay, 4 times 4 is 16. And 16 times 4 is 64. That's what I'm looking for, right? So the cube root of 64 is 4. And remember, when it's a cube root, okay, there's only one answer. Because remember, a negative times a negative times a negative is a negative. Okay, then we have the last one. We have x cubed equals 2. So we have x cubed equals 2. Now we do the cube root again. And we get x equals. Okay, now I go over to my list and I look at my list and I'm like, uh-oh, there's no 2. Well, if there isn't a 2, then that means it doesn't come out even. So we have to leave it the cube root of 2. So we type in here the cube root of 2. Okay, now I'm going to show you how to do this. So pause the video if you still need to get work done. Okay, so our first answers were 8, negative 8. And then the next one was 4. And then the next one was square root. So you hit the square root button, 11. And then you have to hit the right arrow to take you outside the square root. Comma, negative, and then square root 11. And then the last one is the cube root. So see this root button where it's got the little n in the corner? We type a 3 where that is, and then we have 2. And then we submit. So when you did the square root, you click the square root button, type 11, hit the right arrow to get out of the square root, then type negative square root 11. Number 4. Number 4 says c cubed equals 216. And it says this is a cube with a side length c, has a volume of 216 cubic centimeters. This equation shows the volume of the cube. So c cubed equals 16. And then they want to know what is the side length then. So c cubed equals 216. So to undo a cubed, we have to do a cube root. Cube root. Okay, when you take the cube root of a cubed, it cancels each other out and it's just c. But now we need to know what it equals, and we just don't know that right now. So this is where we do our list again. So we do 1 to the third power equals 1 times 1 times 1, which equals 1. 2 to the third power equals 2 times 2 times 2, which is 8. 3 to the third power equals 3 times 3 times 3, which is 27. 4 to the third power equals 4 times 4 times 4, which is 64. 5 to the third power equals 5 times 5 times 5, which is, 5 times 5 is 25. 25 times 5 is 125. 6 to the third power equals 6 times 6 times 6. 6 times 6 is 36. 36 times 6. 6 times 6 is 36, carry the 3. 6 times 3 is 18, plus 3 is 21. Aha! There it is. 216. What number to the third power equals 216? 6. So the answer is 6. Now, make sure you put all of the work in the work area, okay? Now, notice that we have this big note on these problems. It says calculators are not allowed on this standard. Okay, that is the biggest that they go. They don't go any bigger than 6, okay? So don't be afraid that the numbers are going to get so huge that you're not going to be able to do it, okay? Make sure you pause the video if you need to get it all written down before you submit. Number 5. So number 5 says s squared equals 144. It says a square with a side length of s has an area of 144 square centimeters. This equation shows the area of the square, s squared equals 144. What is the side length of the square? So got to get my pen again. S squared equals 144. So we have to undo the squared. So we have to square root and square root. Remember that when you square root a squared, it cancels each other out and you just have s. Okay, now I need to know what number squared equals 144. Okay, well, I don't think we've seen that yet. So we went all the way down to 10, if you remember. And 10 times 10 is 100. So I'm going to start with 11 and we're going to try those. So 11 squared equals 11 times 11. Okay, 11 times 11, 1. 1 times 1 is 1. 1 times 1 is 1. 1 times 1 is 1. 1, 2, 1. Okay, so 121. Okay, I'm not there yet because I need 144. So let's do 12 squared. So 12 times 12. Okay, 12 times 12. 2 times 2 is 4. 2 times 1 is 2. 1 times 2 is 2. 1 times 1 is 1. 4, 4, 1. Aha! 144. So notice this time, I didn't do all of them. I remembered that the last time I made a list, my list ended with 10 times 10, which was 100. And so I don't have to do all of them if I know that it's got to be big, okay? So what number to the second power equals 100? It's 12. So the side length is 12. Now, every single time that we have done one of these, where it was a square root, we've had two answers, right? A positive and a negative. But this time, it's the side length of a square. Well, if you draw a square, the length of the side cannot be a negative number. So because this is a real life situation with a real square, it can only be a positive 12. So there's only one answer to this one, because you can't have a negative side length. Okay, make sure you get your work in the work area and then submit. Number 6. Okay, number 6 says x squared equals 28, and it says select all possible values. Okay, so x squared equals 28. How do we undo a squared? We take a square root. The square root of x squared, if you do a square root of a squared, they cancel each other out, and it's just x. Okay, I don't remember 28. Okay, so I'm going to have to list them again because I don't remember 28. So 1 squared equals 1 times 1, which is 1. 2 squared equals 2 times 2, which is 4. 3 squared equals 3 times 3, which is 9. 4 squared equals 4 times 4, which is 16. 5 squared equals 5 times 5, which is 25. 6 squared equals 6 times 6, which is 36. Now I'm looking for 28. Do you notice that 28 would have to be in the middle of those two, which means it doesn't come out even. So we learned that if it doesn't come out even, that it's the square root of 28 and negative the square root of 28. Now remember, this is not the side of a square, so there's two possible answers. Okay, so it's the negative square root 28 and the positive square root 28. And I don't have to check the other numbers because I know it does not come out even. Make sure you have all the work in the work area before you submit. Number 7. Okay, number 7, there's no work area here. It says x squared equals 121, and then it says x cubed equals 216, and it says drag and drop the possible solutions shown on the left to their appropriate spots on the right. Okay, so the first one is 11. So is 11 squared 121, or is 11 to the third power 216? Well, the way that I can do this is I can figure it out. I can do 11 times 11. 1 times 1 is 1. 1 times 1 is 1. Okay. 11 times 11 is 121. So that tells me that 11 goes under the 121. So I'm going to take the 11 and move it over here. Now, I remember that we've learned that negative 11 also works, so I'm going to move the negative 11 over. Okay, now, if I want to solve this, how do I undo a squared? I have to do a square root. So the square root of 121 has to fit over here too, and so does negative the square root of 121. Okay, now all I have left are 6 and the cube root of 216. Well, I know the cube root has to go over here because if I want to undo a cubed, I have to do a cube root. And 6 times 6 is not 121, so 6 times 6 times 6 must equal 216. Okay? And then the last one. So this one also doesn't have any work that you're going to do. So it says, first of all, I want you guys to see that if you see this, it means x squared. So some computer programs don't have the ability to do the x squared. So they use this little arrow thing. We call it a caret. And that means squared. And then this means x to the third power. So that means x cubed. Okay, now it says create an equation that has solutions of 12 and negative 12. Okay, so create an equation that has solutions 12 and negative 12. So if you look right here, our two possibilities are x squared and x cubed. Well, I'm remembering that we've learned today that the only one that could have two answers is the x squared. So this has to be x squared. Okay, well then I need to know what is 12 times 12, because x squared would be 12 squared would be 12 times 12. So I just did this a minute ago, but I don't remember. So I'm going to go ahead and do it over here. 12 times 12. 2 times 2 is 4. 2 times 1 is 2. 1 times 2 is 2. 1 times 1 is 1. 4, 4, 1. Okay, 12 times 12 is 144. Okay, so 144. Now, negative 12 times negative 12 is also positive 144. Okay, now letter B says create an equation that has a solution of only x equals 3. Well, if there's only one solution, it has to be the x cubed, because remember the x squareds have two solutions. So what I want to know here is what is 3 to the third power? Because if I have x to the third power and x is 3, I want 3 to the third power. So that's 3 times 3 times 3. So 3 times 3 is 9, and 9 times 3 is 27. So 3 to the third power equals 27. 27. And I submit. And now you are ready to go do assignment 11C. Okay? Have an awesome day, and I will see you in class.